Hey everybody. So I'm going to talk about two yods that are happening as we speak. I noticed one this morning and then I went back and had a look at something else and realized that I indirectly spoke about a yod in the new moon in Cancer video, but I didn't call it a yod. So anyway, here's what's going on. And when I saw this, I literally just said, holy shit. So basically, now what's this chart for? 24th of June, 9:32 p.m., which is tonight for me. Now, look at the Sun and Jupiter at 3 degrees. Okay, by a couple of hours' time, few hours' time, they will be exactly conjunct. That's when the CAZIMI occurs. I'm going to try and stay up for that, even though it's going to be very late for me because it's peak winter here. We'll see how we go. But even if I do go to sleep before it, I'll just set my intentions before I do. And I suggest the same for you guys if you're not able to be awake when it occurs. Now check your local, uh, time zone relative to the exact occurrence, timing wise, based on your location. Now, let me just grab a little tool. Okay, so there's Mars. Now, Mars forms a sextile to the Sun Jupiter, and I spoke about that in the New Moon in Cancer video. And I also spoke about the fact that Pluto is QUINCUNX Mars. But basically what's happening is there's one yod there, right, between Pluto, Mars, Sun, Jupiter. Now look at um, Sun, Jupiter, and look at Pluto. They're all at 3 degrees. So that's quite important. When you see repeated degrees, there's something quite meaningful about that. It's quite a strong energy when you see the same degree repeated. In this case, we're seeing it repeated 3 times by the Sun, Jupiter, and Pluto. Now, it wasn't too long before this where Mars was also at 3 degrees. But anyway, Mars jumped into 4, and so I wanted it to stay at 3 because that would have just been that would have been amazing if we had them all at 3 degrees. But anyway, it's still amazing because it's very, very important. I'll explain in a moment. I just want to show you the other yod, which most people would not pay attention to. It's with goddess Vesta to Mars. Okay, there's a sextile there. Um, Vesta down to Saturn and Neptune. There's the quincunx and Saturn and Neptune. Quincunx Mars, right? So there's the second yod. So basically, we have two yods in pretty close proximity degrees wise. These are not extended large orbs. I sometimes use larger orbs. It depends on the context, it depends on the person, it depends on the moment and how it all fits together. But in this case, I don't have to do that because everything is so close. Everything is just a couple of degrees apart, which really shows the absolute significance of these two yods happening basically at the same time of the Sun-Jupiter conjunction, the CAZIMI. And I meant to speak to one of the yods when I did a transmission this morning on the Sun Jupiter CAZIMI, and I spoke about it from the point of view of the tropical zodiac and the point of view of the Babylonian zodiac. That was a transmission I just uploaded several hours ago. So take a listen to that because that's really inspiring. There's some really great information in that. And it's not just information for the sake of information, Gemini. It's quite meaningful. what I have to share in that video. But this too is very, very meaningful because a yod, also known as the finger of God, is a yod is defined by the archetype of Pluto because it is an aspect pattern that speaks to destiny and fate, which very much aligns with Pluto. And in one of the yods, we have Pluto at the apex point. You know, in traditional astrology, from the point of view of aspect patterns, when you see a yod and Pluto's in there and at the apex point, that is the truest yod you will ever get. I mean, there are even some schools of thought that will not consider a yod aspect pattern unless it has Pluto in it. That's how strict some people are. I tend to be more flexible because I've seen yods without Pluto still be a yod and have relatively large orbs and still be evident. I've seen this many times over, but that's over many, many years of looking at many, many charts. So this is, the truest yod you'll ever get with Pluto in it and at the apex. So the yod is defined by destiny, fate. It has two QUINCUNX aspects and a sextile, as I've just shown you. The opportunity of the sextile is what triggers the yod to sort of take its form, take its pathway, because a yod is also a fork in the road. It describes a fork in the road, right? It's if we were to relate this to a specific individual, of course, we'd need to look at the context of the person and their story and where they're at in life. But just generally speaking, if we were looking at this for an individual, we might say, okay, well, given where you are at this point in life and given these yods that are showing up in your chart right now, and these are transiting yods, right, which are different to natal yods, but they're just as powerful, right? But they are a moment in time. You know, transits are real time. That's what they are. As the planets and the stars move in the sky, you know, as the earth turns around and everything rises and sets and culminates and so forth, right? These objects or stars or things appearing and disappearing in the sky, right, are a reflection of a moment in time, as above, so below. So transits always work to show us real time versus, for example, secondary progressions or primary directions, which are techniques that are used in predictive work in order to assess what's going on in a native's life at any given moment based on a method and formula. They are not based on real time, whereas transits are. And that's not to say that one is more powerful than the other. It's just simply to draw a distinction and to understand that there are great differences between transits, real time, secondary progressions, primary directions. There's tertiary progressions. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Okay, so let's come back to this moment where there are two yods. Pluto at the apex of one yod with the Sun Jupiter CAZIMI. If that's not a sign of a twist and turn of fate, I don't know what is. And given it's the Sun Jupiter at the other end, you know, and the Sun is a symbol for leaders, kings. We don't really use that term so much in this day and age, unless you look at certain royal families that are still alive, right? In certain parts of the earth, they still, proclaim that titleship, king and queen and so forth. But generally speaking, that the terminology that was used in ancient astrology, has to be translated to today's day and age. So a king can simply be a leader of a country, for instance. And Jupiter also speaks to leaders and kings as well. And here they are together in Cancer in a YOD aspect pattern with two very, very powerful planets, Mars and Pluto, the planets of will. Of course, the planets of war or anger or death or transformation. Mars is the planet of war and Pluto is the planet of the underworld, right? Things, being picked up and revealed, opened up. Pluto opens things up. It takes that X-ray and goes straight to the core of whatever it is that's there and just reveals it. And Pluto is at the apex point here. So I'm very curious to see, even though it's a transiting yod and it's only really there, for the next, let's just say 2 days, right? It might be, it might very well be a catalyst, you know, um, for something that's to come that we still are not sure about. And I'm speaking now to the cataclysmic psychosis that's going on the planet relative to little boys with their little pistols in their pockets who are so disconnected from source that, that's the only way they see that they can achieve their objective. So let's see what this, because a yod is like a twist of fate. It just something big happens and it takes things in a completely different direction. So that's one. And the second one, which is with Vesta, Mars, Neptune, and Saturn. Um, okay, so this is starting to become even trippier. Hang on, let me see. No, okay. Sorry, I just saw something that wasn't actually there. Maybe it's to come. Okay, we'll see. All right, so Vesta, sextile Mars, and then Vesta and Mars are both in conjunct or quincunx, the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Now, as I said, most people won't pay attention to this because most people do not pay attention to the goddesses, the asteroids, and it's to their own loss, if I'm going to be perfectly honest. Vesta, who is an ancient goddess um, from the Greek pantheon, is what she really is one of the most mystical goddesses, right? But once again, without going into the complexities of her, think of her like this in this context at least, because she's sextiling Mars. Now, Mars is a planet of war, aggression. And here we have the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, which is basically birthing a new reality, a new paradigm, a new Earth completely. And that will start to slowly take form next year in February of 2026. Slowly. It's going to take a few years before we see the full capacity of this. So, Vesta in the picture, the way I would perhaps describe this, again, there's an indication of something quite fated taking place, and it's connected to Mars, so it is connected to the aggression and the violence and the so-called war or wars, the conflicts between certain countries or nations, right? The inconjunct to the Saturn Neptune is it's the conflict, right, coming through into the new reality that's been that's seeded, being seeded, and will give birth next year. So there's this conflict right there, Mars, right, with the Saturn Neptune. And Vesta, in this case, one might think, okay, well, why would you pay attention to Vesta? You know, she's just an asteroid, it's a goddess. You know, how does this fit in the story? Well, it's very simple without going into the complexities of this divinity. Vesta is the energy that speaks to someone or a group of people for that matter, wherever, whoever this is connecting to, activating. It speaks to an incredibly undeniable, powerful force of energy that's purely directed at something very specific, right, to the exclusion of everything else. So it's very one-pointed. Vesta corresponds to focus, the focusing principle. So there's a strong focus element in this yod that Vesta brings in. And it is about something changing in the fate of the world, because this is a transiting yod speaking to real-time movement of what's happening in the sky. And there's two of them, as I've pointed out. So Vesta is what we invest ourselves into or towards, something we invest to the exclusion of everything else. She can bring up, well, actually, I won't go into the other descriptions of her because they just don't really relate to the context that I'm speaking to at the moment, because she is a very complex goddess, as I said. So yeah, I think that's really what I wanted to point to. Two yods happening over the next, over today and tomorrow. Pluto's at the apex of one of them, and Saturn and Neptune are at the apex of the other one. And, you know, Vesta, let me just, I just want to quickly find something. Yeah, okay. So this is sort of sidetracking a little bit and it's going out into a bit of a different territory, but I just want to show you just how important Vesta is, not only from a modern perspective, and not only from the Greek pantheon perspective, but in some of Ruman's work, for example, where he talks about the moon's cycle, uh, from the point of view of the new moon, the crescent moon, the first quarter moon, um, the full moon, and that whole cycle that follows around. In that cycle of the moon's cycle, depending on where she is in that cycle, the moon herself has very corresponding divinities as well. It's powerful shit. It's just amazing stuff. Anyway, Vesta, who's also known as Hestia, Hestia is her Greek name. She corresponds to, part of the lunation cycle. That's, I think it's from memory because I just can't quite remember now, but um, I think it's actually, I've forgotten where she sits, but I do know that it's not at the full moon, it's not at the new moon, it's not at the crescent moon. It's somewhere past, it's sort of where the moon is getting close to just before it becomes dark, somewhere around there, I think, right? The goddess Hestia connects. I think it's there. I'd have to double check that, and I will, and I'll perhaps just write a note underneath the video. But regardless of that, I'm just showing you or trying to explain to you that Vesta actually connects very strongly to the whole lunation cycle. unto itself. The lunation cycle, as it moves through every phase, it has a very specific divinity that it corresponds to. And look at the moon in today where we are looking at these two yods. Where is the moon? It's at 20 degrees of Gemini. So where is it in its cycle? It's in its balsamic phase. So it's the moon is dark. It's invisible right now. And that invisibility is even in traditional astrology, the balsamic phase is understood to be a time of withdrawing, resting. It's not a time of action, right? It's not a time of getting up and saying, okay, let's go and do X, Y, Z. It's a time to retreat and withdraw because there's a lot of things happening from a spiritual level, and the underworld, the dark sort of world is very potent at this time, and all sorts of energies and entities are quite animated during this time. So it's best to rest and preserve one's energy, right? So this is where the moon is while these two yods are being activated and playing out. And one of the yods involves Vesta, and Vesta is a divinity that corresponds to the moon's cycle. Personally, I think this is extremely important, extremely powerful, and I think it will be, these two yods will be the catalyst for something quite big that's coming that we are yet to see, particularly while the moon's in a balsamic phase. It's invisible. Let me just show you where you can see its invisibility in the Babylonian chart. Okay, because that's Woman's program has the ability to do that, whereas solar fire does not. So here's a chart for midnight, 25th of June. So that's just a couple of hours away for me. See the moon there? Shaded out in grey. See Jupiter shaded out in grey? That's because they're both invisible. And I also think it's pretty interesting that Mars, whilst it's 4 degrees tropical Virgo, it's actually 10 degrees of Babylonian Leo, which is basically right next to Regulus. So yeah, there's something pretty big happening here, folks. Let's wait and see what it's going to be. But obviously, as I've said, it certainly on that world stage, it definitely connects to very specific so-called leaders and things of that nature, right? That are playing out this game at the moment. There's going to be a twist of fate, and I'll be very curious to see what that is. So let's just keep our eyes open. Let's observe with detachment and objectivity, as opposed to, having a strong identification and, sort of getting hooked into the division, which is their ultimate game. Divide, divide, divide. Drain them, divide them. So anyway, that was just something that I thought I, would love to share and hope that you find it of interest. Reach out if you'd like to connect with me and explore your chart from multiple levels. Much love and see you soon.